Greetings! This is Griff Ruby with my next Isaac Asimov short stories series entry. This one is contained in Super Science Stories. It does mention Asimov very briefly in the small print as one of the authors of something inside. Inside, you get a little more detail from the table of contents, wherein is listed as the third of the short stories here. And the story, as you can see, is listed as Victory Unintentional. Isaac Asimov, page 86. And it even has a little blurb on this thing. The title of things barely hanging together. Okay, and it has on page 86, so let's read the little blurb. And it says, strange, strong, and deadly were they, the three Earth emissaries to warring Jupiter, who held human safety in their hands, and almost dropped it. Okay, well, this story is meant to be a sequel to the other story published in Astounding a few installments back, which we covered a few installments back, called Not Final. As you recall, according to that story, Jupiter was populated by these beings who had been communicating with our station out in Ganymede for however long before they suddenly realized that they were communicating with alien beings who didn't belong to their planet and were therefore inferior and therefore all had to be destroyed. At least once they could find some way to get themselves out of the incredibly thick and heavy atmosphere of Jupiter, which of course was the big problem. No substance, no normal earthly substance, or Jupiterian substance for that matter, in terms of material substance, would be strong enough to contain the kind of atmosphere these creatures would need for their own sustenance. And so, that being the case, there was a big problem with these, how they're going to escape their own planet so as to wage war on the rest of the universe. So, and it seemed like, well, the only thing they could do would be a force field. And they proved, well, a force field would be strong enough to contain even an earthly atmosphere, to say nothing of a Jupiter atmosphere, would be extremely unstable, would just of itself necessarily collapse within a fraction of a second or something. So it won't do any good. So they say, okay, so finally we're safe, we can all rest easy. These Jupiter people, Jovians, will never be able to get out of their planet and arrest us or attack us. Well, and then it's not finally, because then they say, well, now wait a minute. If we make that force field oscillating thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of times per second, it may not have time to decay, meaning it could be strong enough to contain even a Jupiter atmosphere or maybe even an atomic blast. Atomic, of course, hydrogen bombs still being well into the future. Although we're now in 1942, World War II is now underway. So, this story gets reprinted on the pages of the rest of the robots. Alright, and like I said, it's called Victory Unintentional. Because these robots, they weren't trying to have a victory, they were just going to do a little study and take a look. Now, is there any differences between how it's presented there? Well, we've got the blurb I just read from the table of contents. There's another blurb on the main page here at the bottom, and it's also not included. And it says, strange, strong, and deadly were they, the three Earth emissaries to Jupiter's nation of conquest-bent Titans. They're not from Titan, from Jupiter. Oh well. Who held the safety of the human race in their great metal hands, and almost dropped it. There is, of course, also the artwork. One single drawing comes here. Now, in this drawing, here's how it works. In the distance, There's what appears to be some sort of structures that are the town in the distance. In the foreground is the ship that's hollow and breathes and so forth, because these are robots. These big, it shows a couple of them right here. There's 1 and 2, and there's also a 3. They're actually robots designed for the Jupiter world, but because they're robots, they can handle anything from a vacuum to a Jupiter atmosphere. They can handle temperatures from 0 to, hot enough to melt lead. None of that matters to them. So here's these Jupiter beings, some of them looking strangely anthropomorphic here, maybe inside there. There's a part where they come along and they bring this weird machine with a thing on top that makes all this electric lightning or something like that. Sort of trying to create electric power in vast amounts to try to intimidate these creatures, but it doesn't mean anything to them. Oh, here we go. 1 and 2. There's 3 over here. 3's way up in here. Okay, there's 3. Well, I don't know which one is 1, 2, or 3. But at any rate, so we have that rather nice little piece of artwork. There's one other tiny typographical error inside that had to be fixed. And there's a place where they've come out, and one of the first things they meet up with is they get these beams fired at them that raise their temperature by about 30 degrees centigrade. They don't know what that's about. It's a heat beam. They're trying to zap them, and of course it doesn't affect them. It doesn't matter to them. So at any rate, after this has been going on for quite some while, let's see here. No, I found this once. And finally, let's see here. Oh, I know. Let's see here. It's not time for radio. Hey, that's not what's wrong. Okay. All right. Okay. Alright, there was a pause, and then ZZ1, the first one built and the most primitive, whose greater simplicity led at times to increased directness of thought, said heavily, "It might be that these strange creatures, in a rather childish way, are attempting to destroy us." And 2, struck by the suggestion, answered, "You know, 3, I think you're right." Oops. Supposed to be 1, because that's who spoke up, and they corrected that. Other than that, I could find no differences in the text between its original presentation and the presentation that's contained in the rest of the robots. So there's not too much changing there. Now, that said, what about the story itself? For some reason, when Isaac Asimov sent this in to Campbell didn't like it at all. You might note that in my little comments on the video for Magnificent Possession, I have all these, CHOS4, whatever, all this different thing. The chemical formula for this chemical, it's actually what gives the skunk its distinctive aroma. That's actually the review that Campbell gave. It was like, normally Campbell liked to give very long, detailed explanations about what's wrong with this or that story, and please try again, this is what didn't work and why, whatever. Very good about that. Very big on trying to encourage, young Isaac Asimov to how to write better stories. But at this point, it was like, he was kind of past that encouraging stage. Isaac had already written several truly excellent stories, Nightfall, and not Final itself for that matter. The 2 Foundation stories and the robot stories were definitely coming together. And so he started to show some real skill. And actually, this is 1942. Bridle and Saddle will be the last story that he would write for a very long time. A lot is happening. He's got a new job. He's got a new, first girlfriend, then wife. They're having to move, and just all these things. There's so much going on in his life that suddenly his writing career has to take a back seat to everything. And it kind of, it was kind of a neat thing. I used to write stories, but the interesting thing was he was already moved and in his new life with his new wife at the point where Bridle and Saddle actually comes out. And he's like, oh, look at this. I wrote this story. He even got the cover, So it's really kind of this big deal. But the thing is, the shortest pipeline from being written to publish was Astounding Science Fiction. Because you give it to them first, and if they were going to use it, they were generally pretty prompt in using it. So if it didn't go there, then he'd have to send it somewhere else, and who knows how long or when they might get around to publishing it, if they'll publish it, and sometimes even longer than that to pay for it. So, I mean, it wasn't very impressive going elsewhere. So you actually have a few more stories coming out in 1942, of which Victory Unintentional was the first one to come out after Bridle and Saddle, even though it was written quite a bit earlier. And so it was just in the pipeline a whole lot longer. And as I said, there's two more stories coming out in 1942, and those are also just coming out so late because they were just in the pipeline so very long, are in fact much older stories than the Foundation and Bridle and Saddle stories that came out in Astounding Science Fiction in the May and June issues. So, but Campbell didn't like it. He said it stank, and that was pretty much his only comment. Sent it back. So Isaac had to send it around, and eventually, like I said, Super Science Stories, as you saw, finally carried the story. Well, okay, and that went fairly well, but I don't know why. It's a robot story. These robots, they don't mention Susan Calvin, and none needed to be added because this is the rest of the robots, not an iRobot story, nor do they mention Powell or Donovan. But they do seem to have the three laws, although they're so impervious to stuff they really don't even have to worry much about the third law. But the first law only applies to humans, apparently not inhabitants of Jupiter. They seem to have that one straight. So the first law is they're trying to be harmless. And I might as well say, I personally like that story. Something about it is just really kind of fun. He's trying to write it in good humor. And I think for once the good humor finally begins to shine through in a story that makes one smile as you go through it. Because here's these robots, they're incredibly solidly built machines. They can't be meaningfully destroyed. It's like some giant fish tries to grab onto one of them, and the robot there's just all, oh, I'm sorry, but this creature, I didn't mean for this to happen, but this creature broke his teeth trying to bite me and almost scratched my shoulder here. I didn't mean to kill him. I hope you don't mind. If you'd like to use it for food, though, that might be free. And of course, they're just impressed. In fact, they keep doing this, and one in particular, because of his simplicity, seems to be the clumsy one. Oops, I broke something. I am so very sorry. I didn't mean to break this thing, and it's like several inch thick, the strength of metal or something. I mean, these robots are strong, and I mean, you can. At one point, they get in some other areas where there's like a steel foundry, and there's all this molten metal, and one just reaches his hand into that and looks at that. Oh, that's neat. Metal still, molten steel. Okay, and he comes out, no problem. At another point earlier, closer to the picture we saw, they try to squirt him with this blue liquid that's actually liquid oxygen. Doesn't faze him. All this stuff doesn't faze him. And they even had this force field. And I said, we know our force field is much stronger than any force fields we observed on your ship. And they come back with, well, actually, although we have some force fields back home, this ship in particular is not equipped with any force fields. So, and they're like, what? You went through space? Yeah, we can handle the vacuum of space too. It's no big deal. And at that point, the Jovians are just like, these Ganymedians are, we'll never defeat them. Okay, sure. Would you You have made offers of peace, right? Yes, yes, we will make those offers. Of course, of course. And there's peace. So now Jupiter will not attack the rest of the solar system or universe or however much they care to take on. Apparently, at one point, they're not even aware of anything other than the bodies immediately orbiting Jupiter. So maybe they wouldn't even thought to go beyond that, but who knows? Once they get outside, maybe they'd know what was meant by inner planets. They didn't know what that meant when the robots made a passive mention of that. I don't know what you're talking about. There's only the 4, which of course this is written when only 4 of Jupiter's satellites were known, the same ones that Galileo found in his telescope so very long ago. Not too long after they started finding more moons of Jupiter, but that's after the war. Anyway, getting back to all that. Anyway, so here's these robots just managing to impress and finally almost in a way scare the Jovians in many ways with their incredible abilities and their indestructibility and so on. But their peaceful nature is like, okay, we can work this out. I don't know. I personally enjoyed it. I don't know why John Campbell didn't. I guess it just kind of messes with his head as to, well, are these superior to humans? They're obviously stronger and more indestructible and so many other things, and relentlessly polite. So I guess in a way they're better than humans, even though they were made by humans. And the only thing was that the beings they were so impressing didn't understand. These weren't the humans inhabiting Ganymede. These were just made by the humans inhabiting Ganymede, which is robots. Somehow they didn't figure that out. So, at any rate, like I said, I personally enjoyed it. I think it was a fun story, and, well, that's what I can say for Victory Unintentional. They win. And they didn't even intend to. This is just a study visit, Okay. Well, thanks for listening.